Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. You know, SwitchPoint is my favorite conference. Is it not yours? It's not yours? Yeah, I'm so honored and pleased to be here for you today. My name is Phaedra Boinodiris. I'm the global lead for serious games and gamification at IBM. And what I'm going to do, I'm supposed to talk about games for change. There's so much for me to cram in these 15 minutes. I'm going to start off talking about the gamer today, and then give you just a slew of different examples that have impressed me over time, and then give you a sense of where the space is going. Nod. Okay, this is my nephew, Sebastian. He is 8 years old, or rather, he was 8 years old when this photo was taken. He's a big gamer. He plays turn-based strategy games, he plays real-time strategy games, adventure games, but he's not the average-aged gamer. In fact, the average age of the gamer today is 34 years old. Some other statistics which might surprise you. 43% of PC gamers and 38% of console gamers are women. Well over 67% of heads of households within the US play video games multiple times per week. And in fact, collectively, as a planet, we log about 3 billion hours in 1 week of gameplay. 3 billion, just to give you a sense. And this is not what we're playing. Guys, some of you recognize this? Yeah? In fact, the games we're playing today are incredibly sophisticated. Here's a cut scene from a very popular game.
Run out towards that gun, jump now. All dance on the damnation, all dance on the damnation. Scepter, stay here and tackle prophecies. This is where we fight. Let's go, get those fucking bombs out, Raker, fire, Golgers stand by. Come on, boys. Come on, yeah!
That is all in-game footage, and what you're hearing was audio from game players. Again, just to give you a sense, that was EVE Online. Very, very sophisticated game. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of players can play at any hosted instance of time. So, games are incredibly powerful. I know you're probably thinking, okay, I just watched a bunch of talks about Ebola, and now I just saw this clip on EVE Online. What do these have to do with each other? Games are incredibly powerful. Can be incredibly powerful tools to influence, to teach, to solve very, very, very complex problems. And just to give you some examples over time, you know, the state of North Carolina got in big trouble with the Supreme Court. Did you hear about this week with regards to gerrymandering? So this game came out in 2007 just to basically teach the principles. You want to get your law passed, play this game and try and move these political lines around and see whether you can do it. Right? A game to influence, to explain. Half the Sky, have you heard of this game? This is a game, and actually a movie, where within the game, as you're buying things within the game in order to solve problems within your population, you're actually donating in real life as well, whether it's books or resources. Okay. Some interesting research has come out in the past couple years regarding PTSD and how games can treat PTSD. In particular, this research shows that those who play Tetris soon after a traumatic event can actually prevent the retention of memories, of very destructive memories. Really, really interesting work. In fact, the researchers go on to say that if you're studying for a really big test, don't play a 3D game immediately after studying, because you'll be less likely to retain the knowledge that you just studied for. A lot of interesting work coming out. Some local shout outs. I know there were a couple of CEOs from these companies here today, so I wanted to do a shout out. The game in the top left is from TheraSim. This is a game that basically teaches nurse practitioners and physicians how to better interview patients so that they can make better diagnoses and prognoses. We've got malaria vector control from the company Smart Game Systems, led by Jonathan Estes. Very cool game that rolled out in Africa. And of course, the game at the bottom by 3C Institute. This is a game for social and emotional learning to teach teens within schools. And in fact, this week is the big Games for Change Festival out in New York City. And they were nominated for a major award, the Most Impactful Game Award. So again, these are all local, serious game studios to keep your eye out for. And in fact, this area, Wake County in particular, we are #2 in the country for game design and development. I don't know if you knew that, but we've got some incredible schools focusing on game design and development, some incredible studios as well. All right, so back in February, President Obama gave a summit talking about ISIS. And he focused specifically on recruiting tactics and how is it was a think tank, a brainstorming session on what kinds of public policy, what kinds of pilots might be able to be rolled out in order to stem the recruitment of American teens into ISIS. And in fact, in our workshop today, we talked about this. We talked about a game. How might a game be created to influence, right? To influence teens to rethink their decisions. Of course, in a way that is respectful and full of empathy. But again, thinking about how games might be able to influence, has this been considered? As you're thinking about major problems that you're encountering today in your lives, consider this as a potential option. Now, here's where I'm going to do the shift about where things are moving to. Games are getting smarter. There's an incredible confluence of technologies today. The merging of cognitive computing and gaming in particular is something really cool to watch because we're going to see some really interesting things within this space. Have you heard of this game, Fold It? All right, so this came out several years ago. I would say this was the first in a tidal wave of games looking at that emerging artificial intelligence. So for those who don't know, this was a game that was funded by DARPA to the University of Washington. And in essence, what DARPA said was create a casual game such that anybody can play. You don't have to be a biophysicist or know anything about molecular biology in order to play. But in essence, as a result of your gameplay, you're teaching an AI how to better recognize protein structures to create new drugs to combat very deadly diseases, which sounds like science fiction when you first hear it, right? Like utter and complete science fiction. But the University of Washington, they came out with this game that initially has this feel kind of like a Tetris. You're moving these blocks around, you're moving these shapes around. And within the space of a couple weeks, the gamers collectively came up with a protein structure that had taken the scientists 10 years to be able to find the same structure. So again, this concept of using games to solve very complex problems is interesting. Another data point to look at as this space moves is the intersection of biofeedback in games. I was at the Game Developers Conference out in San Francisco a couple years ago, and there was a booth that was showing a superhero game where you're attached to a biofeedback device that monitors not only your heart rate, your blood pressure, your body temperature, but also your brainwave pattern. And in order for your superhero to render himself or herself invisible, you had to not only lower your heart rate, but also change your brainwave pattern. So now what we're seeing is this trend moving into the realm of both serious games and games for entertainment. The screenshot on the bottom is from a game called Nevermind. It's a horror game. And you can't get through the horror game if your heart rate is up because it gets harder. So unless you can stay calm as you're playing the game, you'll never win it. Right? The one on the top left, this won the big award at the ITSEC conference, which is a big military simulation conference down in Orlando every December. It's called Air Medic Sky 1, and it was meant for new medical school students. And the same sort of premise, you have to go and do triage to all of these new patients, coming to you, but unless you keep your heart rate down and manage your stress, it only gets harder, it only gets worse. So interesting to see where these are merging. This is a game from a company, oops, I think it paused. This is a game from a company called Gravitalent. And in essence, what you're supposed to do within this game is you are creating a tower. You do it both as single player as well as multiplayer. And within 8 minutes or less, you're trying to reach that glowing orb up on the top. The screen froze. But you're trying to reach the glowing orb. And within 8 minutes or less, it can assess what kind of critical thinker you are. It assesses all kinds of work personality attributes. And not only that, but post-gameplay, if you do it within your whole organization, it will match you, your work style, to optimal people to make an optimal team based on what kind of a critical thinker you are. Again, cool ways to assess people, right? To assess your employees. Very interesting to watch. All right. This is a space I'm especially interested about. How many of you have heard of Watson? What Watson is? Okay, so for those who don't know, Watson is a cognitive computing system which we've developed within IBM. It adapts natural language, and then it mines all kinds of different data sets in order to determine the answer, and it gives a percentage level of confidence as to whether the answer is correct. So this played in Jeopardy against real people and won, right? So imagine your typical city sim game. You guys are familiar with SimCity, how it works? So imagine you've got a city where you've got 500,000 people in it, but you only put down 4 fire stations. The way that the game would typically react is based on how a game programmer, right, creates rules and thresholds for how often fires will break out within your city, right? And this happens well before the game is launched and shipped. Imagine instead if those game rules was determined by something like Watson, an artificial intelligence that has mined historical data about the city, right? So now, when I put down 4 fire stations, it will be able to determine, based on the building codes, based on the weather patterns, based on X, Y, and Z, here's how my game is going to react. You can imagine what that means not just in terms of defense simulations, but games to affect public policy, right? You can just imagine what that could mean. Now, the future of this space, where this is going, is that it is going to become more modular, right? Just like any kind of software development today. What I mean by this is, how is it that you might be able to more rapidly and cheaply create these kinds of game platforms for organizations by leveraging what is already there? So we're actually creating a game development ecosystem within IBM on our cloud infrastructure. So we're opening up our Watson API, we're opening up our analytics engines for developers to be able to plug in and use and make it available on the cloud. That's what we're doing. So I hope this talk has inspired you and made you rethink games and how it might be able to be used. Thank you.